Hi everyone, this is Stereo Niche. I'm Scott Schneider. Hey, this week I'm going to talk about the little receiver I picked up last weekend, a Sansui G 4700. In addition to that, I also want to talk about how I review big speakers. So stick around to the very end. All right, so this is the G4700 that I showed just last week in my video of the Shelby, North Carolina Hamfest. And so I just picked this up and thought, well, while I have it out, while I've gone, checked it out a little bit, I thought I would go ahead and talk about it in a video. So the 4700 is the smallest of the series. The series started in 1980 and only went through 81. They weren't around very long. Their claim or distinction due to the prior model lines were that they incorporated this little digital readout here for the tuning section. And it also obviously has the analog dial, which is what everyone was accustomed to through the 70s. And they added both here. They didn't go all digital or stay all analog. They went and incorporated both, and that's sort of what differentiates the X700 series from other models lines in the Sansui line. Unfortunately, it turns out that that happens to also be a bit of the weak link for that particular series. Very often they stop working. There are some chips in there that that start to malfunction and they don't work right. And unfortunately, that's the case with this one. So as I mentioned in a video some time ago about collecting, it's about how to price things. And if you go in to buy something, make sure you've priced it accordingly, that if there's something wrong with it, you're not upside down. And so I priced this one accordingly and I'm just fine. So everything else seems to be working fine. It still tunes in, the tuning function still works. And, it sounds pretty good. And it's in very good physical shape. So, from a purchase perspective, I'm not disappointed. The other thing that's cool about them is this quartz lock tuning. That's a nice feature. It's sort of when you tune it and you get close to the signal, it sort of reaches out, grabs the signal, and locks onto it, and it works very well. It's different from other prior receivers or tuners where when you're tuning in, you constantly have to very closely try to dial it in yourself. This sort of reaches out, locks on it. It's by just getting close to it. And so it's a nice feature to have. Still a similar, you can see it, it's sort of an interesting evolutionary change that they were going through. And this is sort of that in-between, stage of from the X000 series into the X700 and then on into the 50, I think it was 50, 60, 70 series. And then it became all digital, right after that. So it was kind of a, interesting evolution watching these. If you look at the pictures and see them evolve. So quite an interesting unit. One thing I did see too, by the way, when I was trying to make sure I understood the model, the versions in the model line. So the 4700 is the smallest. Then there's a 5700, 6700, 7700, and then it jumps to the 9700. Now that's the 00. But there is out there, and I own one, an 8700 dB. So when I was going through confirming the MSRP and some other things in stereo review, I typically reference their annual magazines for that year just to make sure I know what models were offered. And there's no mention of an 8700 dB. So I'm not sure, but I suspect that may have been a military PX only offering. If anyone knows for sure, I'd appreciate it if you put it in the comments because I'd kind of like to know the origins of the 8700 dB. So I think that's kind of it in general. You'll get some up close shots, see it, how nice it looks, and then at the end we'll come back and we'll talk about the specs. See you soon. All right, so let's go through the specs of the G4700 from Sansui. So again, these were available from 80 to 81, and the MSRP was $430. So it's an entry-level model, but you know, it still was a pretty decent amount of money back then. $430 was, you know, not inexpensive. So what'd you get for that money? So in the power side of things, it's rated at 50 watts. So that's, you know, on the low end of my scale here. So it gets 10 points for that. But unfortunately it does not have a 4 ohm spec. So that's the one thing that's, you know, kind of unfortunate about the series. Everything is stellar, especially when you get up into the higher end units. You get a lot of power, but I don't believe that the higher end units, if I can recall, also had 4 ohm spec. So this one surely does not. And so unfortunately you don't get to run those, you know, those ADS speakers, you know, and those other 4 ohm speakers that were out there during that time frame. So let's see, moving on, cartridge wise or phono wise, has one phono, so it gets 10 points. Other optional sources, doesn't have a lot. Unfortunately, you've got really just two, and it's kind of a shared switch here between auxiliary and tape. There is a tape input, and then there's also a separate auxiliary. So you kind of had to share the same, you know, the same switch here. So it maxed out at 2. So it gets 20 points for that. Has balance, gets 5 points. Loudness, 5 points. Has bass and treble controls, so 5 points each. Does have a high-low switch, so that's good. 10 points for that. You know, it has power meters, although they're digital. They're not the analog, but it does have power meters in there. So it did get 20 points for that. Let's see, where am I here? Does have a, well, it's not exactly wood, but it's simulated wood, so I gave it 20 points for the simulated wood cabinet. So it does have that. Switches, AC switches has one of each, so it gets 10 points and 5 points. And then number of speakers it can accommodate are 2 sets. Now, interestingly, I'd mentioned it doesn't have a 4 ohm capability, but it does give you the ability to do AB actually, which I find a little interesting since it doesn't confirm that it can handle 4 ohm loads at all. I guess, you know, it must figure out the impedance automatically or something. But anyway, can handle 2 sets of speakers, you know, for this unit. So all told, doesn't come in, you know, it's missing a lot. Again, it's an entry-level unit, very basic. So with all points, comes in at 145 points. So, that's on the low end of the majority of the receivers I've reviewed, because a lot of the receivers I've reviewed are really higher end so far. But I think they're great little units. Not going to run, not powerhouses, of course. Not going to run, big speakers, only 8-ohm speakers only, of course. But if you've got a smaller room and you don't have big expectations, and you just want something that's kind of has the look, looks big but isn't, this may be the receiver for you. Just know that the tuning, digital tuning dial here may be an issue. If it isn't an issue when you get it, maybe down the line. Just something to think about and something to know about this particular series. All right, that's kind of it. So stick around and we'll talk about this guy over here. All right, well, thanks for sticking around for a little bit longer. I wanted to talk about basically big higher end speakers. And this is the Thiel CS7, extremely heavy speaker, by the way. I just moved it over here, and this concrete baffle makes them about 170 pounds, I think. So quite an effort to move these things. That's not what I want to talk about. What I want to talk about is how I've been doing my reviews. As you know, I have the Advent as my baseline for everything that's not a bookshelf. I've been using, or have started using, the Minimus 7 for small bookshelves as my reference and my baseline for any other comparisons. And everything after that has been up against the Advent. Well, I have quite a few pairs of very high-end speakers, and many of them were top of the line from those manufacturers. These Thiels, for example, were $9,000 roughly in the late 90s. Where these were the top of the line in that model from Thiel, and the Advent was never really meant to compete at that level, although it's a great little speaker. So my thinking was, or have been thinking about, selecting another speaker to be my baseline for say higher end speakers, and that would be my Pioneer TZ9s. They retailed for, I think, about $4,500 in the mid 90s, and are quite a capable speaker. They're my current high point speaker. So I thought maybe I should use that as my baseline to go up against other, higher end model lines like these Thiels here. I have several others. I could also redo my review perhaps of some of the other ones I've done prior, maybe, but I've got a lot of several sets of really cool high-end speakers that I think you might like to see them up against something a little more in their weight class, I guess. So let me know what you guys think. Just wanted to throw that out there. Give me some feedback, and then I'll make a decision and get those reviews started so we can see how they compare. So that's it for this week. Thank you guys for tuning in, and if you want to keep up, hit that subscribe button. See you next time.